Welcome to The Aggressive Life. Hey, here's a riddle for you. A psychotherapist, a songwriter, an Episcopal priest, and an Enneagram expert walk into a bar. How many people are in the bar? One. That's the answer. Morgan Cron is all those things and a lot more. He's the best-selling author of the books, The Road Back to You and The Story of You. It's always a good thing because that's everyone's favorite topic is you.
Is me.
Yeah, me.
That's right.
Me,
yeah,
you.
exactly.
Yeah, it's good. He also hosts the insanely popular podcast, Typology. It's about understanding and applying the Enneagram personality typing system. Through interviews with guests from all of the 9 Enneagram types, he's able to dig beneath the surface of what makes people tick so they can live fuller, more joyful lives. He's also created the Typology Institute, an online community where participants can take courses, have access to exclusive content, and join Ian for monthly live town halls, all in an attempt to help people better know themselves and the people around them. He's a good man who I once tried to hire. Did you know this, Dirk? Did you?
I didn't know that before this. Yeah.
I tried. It was one of the more annoying conversations I've had with anybody. I'll see if he remembers this conversation. I was all full of energy and fire and aggression, believe it or not. And I just called this guy thinking, of course, you're going to stop working at this Episcopal church, just come here and be the worship leader. Of course.
And no.
No, of course not. No. I couldn't understand why. Why wouldn't you want to listen to me? Why wouldn't you want to change your whole life? Just because I had a 10-minute high-octane conversation with you. I don't know. He's actually a good guy. We were laughing about this because I was on his podcast recently, so he's returning the favor. He's going to expand our knowledge on ourselves and others, not just fill our mind with amazing factitudes. I think that's an actual word, isn't it? Welcome to The Aggressive Life, Ian Morgan Cron.
Brian, good to be here.
Good to have you here. Thank you for coming. Very good. Now, I know you want to judge me right now because you love doing that. So just tell our audience, based on what you heard me, therefore, Brian is a classic what? Go ahead, apply a number to me and tell everybody why I am, and just go ahead and judge me.
Well, first of all, I'm not going to judge you. Second of all, I'm
yes, you are. Come on. I know you're thinking. I'm looking at you. You're thinking it.
No. But you certainly are one of 3 aggressive numbers on the Enneagram, 3, 7, or 8, and I would probably put $100 on that. You're just based on your self-presentation just now, possibly an 8.
Oh, I didn't know that 7 was an aggressive thing. I thought 7s were sort of the happy party people.
So when I say assertive or aggressive types, what that means is that when they see something they want or they need, they will go and ask for it or they'll take it.
Oh, I see. Got it. All right, good. Hey, you got to do one favor for me. I need you to say 2 words, okay? I'll give you the words. Say them one at a time. Nick. Spiker. Say it.
Spiker.
Oh, I've got a good friend of mine who is in love with Ian Cron. And the fact that Ian Cron said his name, he will love that. We've actually had him on the podcast before. His actual name is Nick Spiker is his name. And because it's the greatest action hero name ever. And I've been in a men's group with Nick for years and years and years now. And he's the one who really started turning me on to the Enneagram. And he's a rabid follower of yours. Very, very thankful for you. You've had a big, big impact on his life. And we'd be in men's group, and he would just say, well, it's classic 7 behavior. Well, that's the way 3s are. And it's so much so I started challenging him. I said, hey, man, I'd like to hear you quote a Bible verse every once in a while instead of an Enneagram number. But he's really helped by it and is into it and is actually doing a little consulting on the side from his main gig. So all that to say, Ian, a lot of us have heard of the Enneagram or haven't heard of the Enneagram. It seems like it's only growing in popularity. Would you please give us just a prime run? What is the Enneagram? Where did it come from? Why is it becoming popular? You are the guru of the Enneagram by any measurable metric in America. So thanks for coming on with us. Just give us a backstory. What is the Enneagram? All that stuff.
Yeah, man. So the Enneagram, very simply, is a personality typing system. It teaches there are 9 basic personality styles in the world, one of which we gravitate toward and adopt in childhood as a way to cope, to feel safe, and navigate the new world of relationships. The interesting thing about the Enneagram is it doesn't just tell you what you do, right? It doesn't describe just traits and characteristics of a personality style. It also tells you why you do it, right? So there is an unconscious motivation for each of those types that powerfully influences how it predictably and habitually acts, thinks, and feels from moment to moment on a daily basis.
And who invented the Enneagram? How long has it been around?
Well, it's been around a long time, and you will get a lot of different answers to that. We see the very early stages of its development 1,700 years ago with a Christian desert monk by the name of Evagrius Ponticus. And it has gone through the hands of countless people. It was an oral tradition for a very long time. In the 1970s, people began to write about it, and where it really emerged from largely was from in the Catholic tradition. There were spiritual directors using the Enneagram to help directees learn more about themselves. And so I first learned the Enneagram from a guy named Richard Rohr, and Richard introduced me to it, and that was in the 1990s. So it's been a minute. I've been around this thing for a little minute.
How did you get to know Richard Rohr? A lot of people would love to be around that guy. For those our listeners don't know, he's sort of a classic figure in the man space, Christian space, Catholic priest, was a Catholic priest, Orthodox Christian, or was an Orthodox Christian. I don't know. He's kind of mishy-mashy to me. But how did you get to know him?
Well, not so mishy-mashy. He's still a Catholic priest. He's a Franciscan.
He is.
In Albuquerque, New Mexico, where he runs the Center for Action and Contemplation. And I first started listening to Richard on cassettes in the 1980s. And then I wrote a book. My first book was called Chasing Francis, which was about St. Francis of Assisi. And I remember thinking, oh, man, if I could just get this guy Richard Rohr's endorsement. But how would I ever get a hold of him or know him? And I ended up sending him the manuscript. He wrote a beautiful endorsement for the book. And over the years, we got to spend some time with each other and share speaking things together. And he's had a pretty profound impact on my life.
So he's out in New Mexico. I didn't connect it till just now. Is he running the retreat center where all the Hollywood types are going to right now?
Probably, yeah.
Yeah. We had Matthew McConaughey on, a while ago, and he was talking about going out to a retreat center. It just dawned on me, oh gosh, he's probably quoting Richard Rohr when he said,
yeah, probably so.
Me too. Remember that was the thing? He started confessing all the things, all the shortcomings, and waited for the priest, and the priest just looked at him and said, me too. I'm wondering, that might be the same place. Interesting. So it seems like the Enneagram is growing in massive popularity, yes?
I mean, I think it is getting around for sure.
And why is it? Why do you think we are so enamored with this right now? Why is it growing in such popularity versus we don't hear people talk too much about Myers-Briggs anymore or the disc profile, but it seems like I'm hearing more and more Enneagram talk. Why is that?
Well, I mean, I think God aside, the greatest mystery that you and I have to face every day is ourselves. And all of us kind of want to understand why we find ourselves locked in patterns of thinking, acting, and behaving, many of which don't serve us very well, right? And how do we kind of break through some of those patterns and ways of being in the world to become the highest expression of who we are? So I think people are always looking for ways to self-discover and understand who they are and how they move through the world. So it makes complete sense to me. The nice thing about the Enneagram, as compared to, and by the way, I do a lot of corporate consulting and presentations, so a lot of what I do. So I've been around the Berkman, Colby, Hogan, Strength Finders, DISC, MBTI,
right.
I mean, all of them, right? I love anything that helps people better understand who they are so they can move through the world with a little less friction and be able to love themselves, others, and in a faith context, God as best they can in this life, right? So I'm all in favor of those. The reason I like the Enneagram so much is that it's actually pretty easy to learn. It's hard to master, but it's easy to learn. And it's pretty actionable pretty quickly. And it does a really nice job of describing the interior architecture of different kinds of people Granted, it's a low-def picture, but it's a better picture than the one you had before.
When were you first turned on to this, Ian?
I was in graduate school training to become a psychotherapist, and I was at a retreat center in the mountains of Colorado, and I happened upon Richard Rohr's book, The Enneagram, A Christian Perspective. And that was my first introduction to the Enneagram, and I was obviously in grad school. I had little babies at home. I didn't have time to dive too deeply into it, but I remember thinking to myself, where has this been? Oh my gosh, I've been studying abnormal personality psych, and I've been studying personality development, all this different stuff. And yet here is this other tool that I hadn't heard very much about. And so over the next decades, I continued to return to it in different ways, and until I decided to write a book about it, and which of course then thrust me deeply into the waters of the Enneagram to learn more about it.
That's a pretty interesting thing for me and a lot of us when we think about people who've sort of migrated into a different career path. To borrow the name of the show for a moment, the aggressive life. You know, it's really passive to just say, this is what I was trained in, and this is what my degree is in, and I've been doing this forever, and at this point just can't stop. At some point, you had to shift from making your livelihood from other ways or having your focus on other things to being the Enneagram guy. What'd that process look like, Ian? Like, did you start dabbling your toe in it, or what took place?
I mean, listen, here's the thing I would say about me historically, and that is that I just kind of follow my nose. Wherever I smell something I find is interesting and could be helpful to other people, I love to go all the way down the wormhole, try to understand it, try to make it accessible to other people, right? Kind of demystify, make it simple, basic, easy to grasp. And so I wrote this book, The Road Back to You, and I remember I was at a stop sign in Franklin, Tennessee, and I was under pressure from my agent to write a book. I had no idea what to write a book about. All I remember was thinking to myself, at this stop sign, it was like an epiphany. Honest to goodness, this is the truth. And I remember, wait a minute, I said, nobody has written a book about the Enneagram, and I hear people talk about it all the time. Nobody has written a book about this since the 90s. Maybe that is a big open lane on the highway. And I just got a passion and a sudden knowing, you know, when that happens. And I just chased it hard. And then, you can't predict if a book is going to do well. There's just so many forces that are at play that are well beyond your control. But timing, luck if you believe in it, grace if you don't. I can't explain it, but it just took off in a way that I hadn't anticipated, and that opened up doors, and I walked through a bunch of them, and here I am.
When you decided to write that book with that epiphany, how many cumulative years of knowledge had you had at that point? Like, were you able to say, okay, I'm going to lock myself in a cabin in the woods and just get all this out in paper, all my learnings, or did you have to go into deep research mode?
All the above. So I was fortunate. A couple of things happened. Well, one is I had been through some Enneagram trainings in previous years before, like week-long trainings with Riso and Hudson, or with different people, with Richard. So I had I would say, a good baseline knowledge of what the Enneagram was. And then, of course, my friend Suzanne Stabile did a lot to help me to really understand the Enneagram. A profound debt of gratitude to her. And, but it was a time when I had to really do a real lock myself in, do a deep dive. But of course, I'd also been a therapist for 20 years by that point, so I also had a good fundamental understanding of what the personality was. And I was a trained Episcopal priest, so I'd been to divinity school. I understood basic theology. So all those things came together to kind of make it a ripe moment for me to write something about the Enneagram.
How many times do we hear of some invention or something comes out and you hear somebody say, oh, that's so obvious. I mean, everyone's thought of that. Or why didn't I actually do something with that? That seems to happen a lot. The answer is because, well, it wasn't obvious, number one, or number two, you were just too lazy to do anything about it. I think about you in that book of there had to be other people who were at stop signs at other times and had the idea for a fresh take on the Enneagram. But you're the guy who aggressively said, I'm going to hunker down, I'm going to make this happen. And bam, bestseller.
You know, I can't explain it except to say I get up every morning and I'm really, really thankful that I get to be with people who ask me interesting questions and think that something I might have to say will be of value. And that's it's a great thing to go to bed at night knowing that you're working in a milieu where you get to help people and make your living at it at the same time, and it's fun. I mean, to me, that's like such a gift.
What is your number?
I'm a 4. The individualist.
4.
Yeah, sometimes called the romantics. Yeah.
The romantics.
I just did a 2-day corporate workshop for a company, and pretty much every time I go to companies, there's very few 4s in that population. They are disproportionately represented in the arts, in the creative fields, and they are probably the most complex number on the Enneagram. That said, they love the idea that they are the most complex number on the Enneagram. So they wear that as a badge of honor.
When I was on your show, I was never sure what I was on, if I was on a podcast or I was with somebody who was trying to make me go through my childhood and make me cry. I kept trying to figure out what was going on, because that's part of your thing is you believe, or maybe it's official Enneagram, that our personality is set with early childhood experiences. What was your early childhood experience that set you on the course to be a romantic number 4?
Well, let me just actually address what you just said, because I want to refine. Let me refine it for a second.
You're the pro, not me.
So anyone who says that they know how the human personality forms, right, and they say that with a great deal of certitude, is delusional. It is maybe the most hotly contested area of conversation among different schools of psychology. So your personality, we could say, people ask me all the time, is it nature or is it nurture? And I'd say, well, yes, and more. Your personality is the product of early childhood experience, genetics, biology, trauma, cultural forces that come into play, cultural expectations. So it's so much more complex than just saying it's the product of early childhood experience. That's an important piece of it, but it is by no means the only part of the equation that forms us into the people that we are.
Oh, okay, good. That's great. So how about you, when you look back at your childhood, and you got a book out around your childhood, My Father, the CIA, and Me. We'll talk about that in a moment. But if you look back at your past, and you can't certainly look inside your own DNA, were there any clues that would have said, well, this could have mean why I tend to be a romantic 4?
Yeah, absolutely. I think by nature, by virtue of sort of inborn temperament and disposition from birth, right? I'm a naturally self-reflective person. Even as a little kid, I was very attuned to other people's feelings as well as to my own. I was very drawn to aesthetics and beauty. I was a songwriter. I was very much a book kid. I was a nonstop reader, and very naturally drawn to spiritual things all the time. So I think, part of it is just the world caught my attention. Parts of the world caught my attention in different ways. And so I can look back and say with pretty good certainty, oh man, looking at what I was like at 6 and 7 years old, I was like, yeah, you were a 4. It was pretty clear early on. And for some people, it's fairly obvious, and for others, it's not as clear. But I think for me, it's pretty clear.
Could you give us just a basic rundown real quick, 1 to 9, what those are?
What the 9 numbers are?
Yeah. Yes, please.
Sure. So, tell you what I'll do. Any editorial comments you want to put with it, if you don't mind. Well, because there's 9 types and we have a limited amount of time, I'm going to give you maybe one sentence on each. How's that?
That's perfect.
And what the sentence I'm going to give you is a description of the unconscious motivation of that type. And remember, the unconscious motivation powerfully influences how that type acts, thinks, and feels, right? So it's the why you do what you do, right? I'm not going to describe the types in all of its traits, so we'll be here all day. I could write 200 pages on each of these types. So one sentence for the sake of time. Type 1s are called the improvers. We used to call them the perfectionists, but I changed their signifier because it hacked off too many type 1s. They thought it was just a sort of a pejorative sounding name, right?
Interesting.
Ethical, meticulous, detail-oriented, morally heroic people. They're motivated by a need to perfect themselves, others in the world. Type 2s, the helpers, warm, caring, giving, supportive. They're motivated by a need to be needed. Type 3s, the performers, success-oriented, image-conscious, and wired for productivity. They're motivated by a need to succeed, to appear successful, and to avoid failure at all costs. 4s, the romantics, creative, sensitive, moody, emotionally intense people. They're motivated by a need to be special and unique, to compensate for a perceived missing piece in their essential makeup. Type 5s, the investigators, analytical, a little emotionally detached, and very private. They're motivated by a need to gain knowledge, to conserve energy, particularly in the relational domain. And they are very independent, and they want to avoid relying on others. 6s, the loyalists. We think there are more 6s in the population than any other type. That's speculative, but anecdotally, that's what I hear repeatedly from teachers. Committed, practical, witty. They're worst-case scenario thinkers who are motivated by fear and the need for security, safety, support, and certitude. Type 7s, the enthusiasts, fun, spontaneous, adventurous. They're motivated by a need to be happy, to plan stimulating experiences, and to avoid psychological and emotional pain. Type 8s, the challengers, commanding, intense, confrontational, larger-than-life personalities. They're motivated by a need to assert strength and power over the environment and others, to mask tender and vulnerable feelings, or maybe even better said, to mask weakness. And then type 9, the peacemakers, pleasant, laid back, and accommodating. They're motivated by a need to keep internal and external peace and to avoid conflict. So that's about as quick as I can do it.
That's very good. And do you have an online quiz if someone wants to just do this and just get a basic thing of where they are? Is there one that you recommend?
Yeah, they can go to my website and they can take a look at the IEQ9 test that's there. They can just go to iancron, IANCRON.com and check that out. Or they can read The Road Back to You. Some people I kind of recommend both because, tests are a data point. People tend to assign way too much power to tests. The test said this, so that's what I am. It's like, well, no, it's a data point. If tests every test, I don't care how good it is, from the LSATs to the MCATs to I don't care what it is. They have margins of error, right, at determining things, right? So maybe not be so much true with LSATs and MCATs, but certainly with things like when you're talking about trying to figure out what's going on inside of another human being. They have margins of error. So sometimes reading a book and reading descriptions of the types, a narrative description is something I strongly recommend they do in concert with a test.
Yeah, I found the Enneagram helpful, not just for understanding my personal base drive. It's also been helpful because we're able to see there's certain positions inside of our organization where if you're not a specific number, and I hate to limit somebody by a number, this isn't a matter of limiting somebody by a number, but recognizing that the demands of that job are going to be such, if you're not one of these numbers, it's going to be really not a good life for you because you're just not going to like it. Like all of our community pastors, they're all 3s. Because you've got to be a friend of 1,500 people and have people want to be around you and you want to be around them and you've got to be excited about having something that's growing and working. That's just the way it is. And I had another one as example here. I'd like to hear your play off of this. I think we're far enough away now from COVID that no matter who had a dug in or entrenched position one way or another, I think we're far enough away now that we can look back and just do a little post-rigor mortis autopsy and just start to have a discussion on what we learned and all that stuff instead of getting offended that somebody doesn't agree with me about vaccines or some such thing. Nick had said to me in our group, and I'm curious your take on this, he said most of the people, I think he said 60% of everybody in America is a number 6. Is that about right, you think?
I think to be that specific is incautious. We think there are more 6s than any other type in the population, but that's very speculative. There's really no way to know that, right?
Okay.
So to assign an actual percentage is pretty ambitious.
Maybe I'm hearing something. Maybe I'm hearing something from him. But his thing was that the 6, and this is great, Nick Spiker is so loving that I'm talking about him with Ian Cron, and now I'm probably misquoting him. And now he's utterly dying because now I'm just gonna make up stuff that Nick said about the Enneagram, and so Ian could tell him he's a loser. That's great. So Nick said this, and let Ian shoot it down. No, but he said that the number 6 is kind of the conservative type. They're the teachers, they're the accountants, they're the ones you need to have roles because you need your books to balance. You don't need kids running with scissors in their hands, those kind of things. And those folks are much more conservative. So his thing was the reason why we were so conservative as it relates to COVID is because we have so many 6s and they influence a whole household and a whole country because that's a very popular one. And so they're wired for caution. Your thoughts on that?
First of all, I think that we live in a world in which it's very easy to motivate people with fear, right? Fear is perhaps, if you can arouse fear in people, you can control them, okay? And politicians know that, advertisers know that, marketers know that, right? Create anxiety and promise a solution to it, you're going to get the attention of a big swath of the population. If most of the population is, in fact, geared or oriented towards 6, then you can say that they are, in some ways, maybe the most manipulable part of the population. And therefore, that's one of the reasons we have so much anxiety and fear being used as a currency of influence over people. So again, this is all very speculative, but I think it makes for important conversations, right? Like, for people to do a little self-examination and ask themselves, to what degree am I just availing myself to the forces of anxiety in the culture? And how do I create a healthy boundary between myself and those who would elicit nothing but anxiety out of me and use me and manipulate me using fear and anxiety? I mean, everything is designed for clickbait, and the best way to get someone's attention is throw out a headline or an idea that is going to stimulate anxiety and then see what happens. You can sell a lot of refrigerators on the basis of just making people wonder if there's something wrong with their current one. So that could be harmful, right, in some way. So again, listen, when a candidate comes along of any stripe and says something to the camera like, I am the only person who can keep you safe, let me tell you, that gets people's attention fast, especially if most of the population is 6 in orientation. Again, we don't know, but it is for sure a fact of the world in which we live. Yeah.
Yeah, it makes sense just in terms of how our society is structured with more insurance policies, more helmets, more seatbelts, more rules, more regulations, and we just keep adding more and more and more. So it makes sense. I would probably think that probably every podcast. Well, would you agree with this? Do you think podcasts tend to each specific podcast tends to attract a specific type of the Enneagram? Like I would assume, like in the aggressive life, if you've opted into aggressive life, I'd assume we probably have more 8s that are here than are on a needlepoint podcast.
I guess that's probably true. If I had to make a bet on it, I'd say that's true. I think podcast hosts attract people with similar interests and passions. And, I listen to podcasts. I know of people of different types, right? But yes, it all depends on what your interests are. But clearly we are drawn toward people who are of similar makeup and interest.
Yeah, when I learned that one of the drivers for me was, for my type, is progress, making progress. I was kind of bummed when I heard that because I had really pulled out of a funk I'd been in for a while. I had gone from being in a desert to being drained and then discouraged, a long 18-month process through each one of those three things. And I pulled out of it. I was doing really, really well. And I learned that one of the marks for me is need progress. And I looked and I said, oh no, please don't tell me that's true, because I feel like I'm making progress in my life right now. Am I really that predictable that now all of a sudden I'm out of my funk and it's because I'm making progress? I thought like it was God brought me to a new place, which he did. Maybe he brought me to a new place by enabling me to make progress. I'm just saying that I think for our listeners, it's helpful to understand the studies of people who have looked at a lot of people, and we're all not that unique. You know, we are all unique, but you're not that unique. There's a lot of people who are roughly like you. That's why these types are out there. So if we broke down, say if we had a higher percentage of eights, maybe threes, I keep thinking of them as the same, but they're obviously not. Just as an example, Ian, what are some things that you would counsel an 8 with? This is an example for all the other ones that I'm trying to incentivize people to go look. Like, here's some of the things you should be thinking about in your life. Here's some of the ways that you may be unconsciously operating in, and just understand that's kind of where it is, and just be watchful. Any counsel for us?
Yeah, so let's just revisit the unconscious motivation of the 8, right? It's a need to assert strength and control over the environment and others in order to mask vulnerability and weakness, all right? So 8s are, and remembering now that personalities exist on a continuum from being healthy and self-aware to being unhealthy and lacking self-awareness. So in describing sort of a unhealthy 8, they're aggressive, they're overbearing, they can be domineering, they can be brusque, they can be notoriously blunt. They have more energy than any other number on the Enneagram. They run on 240 volts. Most of us run on 120. One number more on 90, but that's a separate topic. And they are people that, if I were to counsel them, I would say that to move through the world with more emotional and spiritual wisdom, that they have to begin to stop confusing vulnerability with weakness. So they can be very highly defended, and they can be autocratic in their leadership style versus a consensus leader versus a more collaborative leader. They need to learn how to listen more, to stop believing that just because it feels like they're getting screwed doesn't mean they are getting screwed by somebody. You know what I mean? And to maybe cultivate a little bit more of, or to recapture, if you will, something of the childhood trust that they lost, I think early on. 8s, in that zone of average to low average health, they are not naturally trusting. They are at times suspicious of the hidden agenda of others. And so to be able to approach the world, let me put it this way. So this is old Christian teaching, right? There are kind of two approaches to the world, right? One is with what's called the pusillanimity, which is the defended heart. It's where we get the word pusillanimous from, right? Or where we get the word pugilist from, right? Fighter, boxer. So it's a very defended kind of posture. And then there's the magnanimity, where we get the word magnanimous from, which means open-hearted, right? And for people who self-identify as people of faith, when we look at the cross, you really see a visual representation of magnanimity, open-souled, right? You have these arms outstretched. It's this open-souled, undefended heart posture to the world, right? And I think that's something that is modeled for us. And so I would say that I think that 8s have to make a move from being pusillanimous to being more magnanimous, to being closed-hearted to being open-hearted, which requires a kind of childlike trust and a softening of the heart toward the world.
All right, so you got me. Pusillanimous.
Pusillanimous.
Okay, fine. Pusillanimous, whatever it is. I have no idea what that word is. Help me, please.
Well, like I said, literally what it means in Latin, pusillanimous, means closed or defended heart. Okay?
Pusillanimous.
And magnanimous would be the opposite, which is an open, great heart, right? Literally. To be open-hearted, to actually make oneself vulnerable to the world. And I think we have that, the person of Jesus, whether you consider yourself a Christian or not, doesn't really matter. I mean, we have this archetype of Jesus that says that this is a way that we should model our lives. That actually, when you think about it, sometimes when I'm having counseling time or consulting time with eights, I'm like, look, I'll just be straight up with you because that's how you like it. I say, look, here's the deal. To be a defended pusillanimous person is actually cowardice. It's not courage. To be an open-hearted, vulnerable person, that requires courage, right? So if you want to be courageous, then you have to make the move from being an aggressive, and sometimes, again, I'm describing eights not at their healthiest, right? But if you are in that zone and you want to get better, then one thing you're going to have to do is to start softening and defrosting the heart, to open it up to the world.
Defrosting, yes. Yeah, I'm hearing this, and I'm hearing a description that's these downsides, a description that's more in line with the younger me, not so much today. I mean, I still have those inclinations, but I don't know, Dirt. You of course, you work for me. You have to say something nice about me, but I don't know the vulnerability. I don't know the vulnerability or being pusillanimous is an issue with me. You?
No, I don't think so. I mean, I watched you tear up on stage a little bit 2 weeks ago talking about your cousin that came to Christ the Billy Graham thing, and it's a soft heart.
Yeah, and when I say mature, I don't even mean spiritually mature. I just mean, I think it's kind of normal for a man to just get a bit more emotional as we get older. Maybe, I don't know what it is. We've had the life kicked out of us.
Well, here's the thing about eights. I will say this about eights, right? So, first of all, people ask me all the time, does your type change in the course of your life? And according to the Enneagram, traditional teaching, the answer is no. However, though your type might not change, you evolve within your type as a person, right? Things happen to us that can soften us, that we develop some wisdom, hopefully over the years, that kind of mitigate some of the more coarse dimensions of our type over time, right? I mean, I'm glad to hear. I mean, I would be appalled if you said to me, I'm no different than I was at 25. I'd be like, okay, that's not good news. So it's, obviously you have evolved and changed, right? The core motivation is still there, right? Like it's pretty hard to lather, rinse, repeat as much as you want. It's pretty hard to get rid of that core motivation. That said, I think that eights as a rule, though they have oftentimes very aggressive exteriors, right? And very defended exteriors. They tend to be really mushy on the inside. They have a lot of tenderness, and that's what has to come out. That's what they have to allow to others to see and experience, right? I've met lots of eights, man. When you get past the exterior, what's behind it generally is a very loyal, kind, protective heart. I mean, protective towards others. But it can take a minute to get to it.
Yes.
You know what I'm saying? So, I do a lot of coaching and in the corporate space, I've worked with lots of eights. And so it's, I always make the assumption that unless there's some other, hopefully not pathological thing going on in that person, that most eights have a very, very tender heart. It's just accessing it and revealing it is hard for them.
Yeah, but even there, the average eight wants to get something done. They want to advance, and they also are enough of a societal psychologist to know that for people to follow them, they have to know their heart. So we will, the smart ones amongst us anyway, recognize that we've got to at least work on the vulnerability, or else people don't want to follow us and won't trust us, and we won't be able to get done what we want to get done.
Well, some people do get that, and I can tell you a lot of people don't. All right. So, and that's true of every type. Sometimes people just get lost in the trance of their historical behaviors and they have a lot of trouble waking up. And they keep getting up every day wondering, why isn't it going my way? And why do I keep doing the same things over and over again, getting the same results, none of which seem to be in my own interest? And so that's where people like me come along and hopefully help them unpack a little bit of what might be going on under the hood. And, so yes, there are different types of each type. There are variants of each type. One, for example, with 8s that actually can be quite attuned to other people's feelings, but they still have that core kind of drive, and largeness of personality, right? Largeness. Like when you walk into a room, Brian, as an 8, right? I suspect, and I don't know you, but I would suspect that when you walk into a room, people know it. People just know it. You have a larger-than-life presence. You are charismatic. You are, no doubt, you have your own thoughts and opinions about different things. You're not afraid to share those thoughts and opinions with people. Other types walk into a room and nobody notices. It's not a bad thing. It's just a thing, right? Like you just come in and you're a full bore. Yeah. Right? Look at the way we started this show. Think of the energy with which you started this show. The intensity of it. I know some types on the Enneagram that could never muster that kind of intensity with at least being authentic to themselves. The way that you did. You came blowing in like a Cat 5 hurricane at the front end of this interview, right? It doesn't take a rocket scientist to figure out that you're probably one of 3 different types, or you're drunk.
That's what we need to add to the Aggressive Life podcast, Dirt. We haven't been doing beers on here for a while.
We have not in a while.
Jeez, we got to get back to our roots. Taking care of your health isn't always easy, but it should be at least simple. That's why for the last 2 years, I've been drinking AG1 every day, no exceptions. At home, on a hunting trip, camping off my motorcycle, no exceptions. It's just 1 scoop mixed in water once a day, every day, and it makes me feel ready to get moving. That's because each serving of AG1 delivers my daily dose of vitamins, minerals, pre- and probiotics, and more. It's a powerful, healthy habit that's also powerfully simple. I like to have it in the morning. I have a 12 ounce of water, so right off the bat, I'm helping my hydration every single morning. This is the one product, if I had to recommend one, I'd recommend this one to elevate your health. It's AG1, and that's why I partnered with them for 2 years. So if you want to take ownership of your health, start with AG1. Try AG1 and get a free 1-year supply of vitamin D3 plus K2 and 5 free AG1 travel packs with your first purchase. Go to drinkag1.com/aggressivelife. That's drinkag1.com/aggressivelife. Get yourself some. Hey, you! Listening to the Aggressive Life podcast right now. We need your help to take this show to the next level. One of the ways that you can do that is by leaving a rating and review. Whether it's Apple, Spotify, or YouTube, your ratings and reviews go a long way in putting the show in front of new people. So to say thanks, we have something just for you. That would be to say thanks for you actually leaving a review. You can do that and then shoot an email to Dirt with your mailing address, and we'll send you a postcard and Aggressive Life sticker. It's all on our system, so leave those reviews, shoot that email, and you'll get something sweet in your mailbox. Let us know at dirt@briantome.com. That's your real
That's my new email address.
Oh, my gosh. That is awesome. dirt@briantome.com. Let's get on with the show. You have these amazing phrases I'm writing down in, like, the trance of our historical behaviors. I love that. Talk more about the trance of our historical behaviors.
Well, you know that, we tend to fall asleep, in our personalities. In other words, human beings don't like to unnecessarily burn calories, right? Self-awareness requires you burn some calories, that you are continually observing and monitoring and regulating your personality in real time, right? That requires you burn some calories. A lot of people just fall asleep in their personality and keep doing the same crap over and over and over and over again. And again, much of that behavior, though it might work in certain circumstances, and certainly may have worked for you as a kid to help you get your needs met, in adulthood, it doesn't always serve you very well, right? And you see this, I know as a pastor, when you did counseling with people, you saw people just like, why do you keep doing the same thing over and over again, expecting different results? Like, it's just not, you know, right? We see that all the time. And it's because people are just asleep, right? They're just in the trance of historical behaviors. They're just doing the same thing over and over again, not knowing why it's not working, but they just don't know a different way. And part of the road, you know, part of my job as a therapist, and I don't have a practice anymore, but certainly, and even in coaching, I do this. The more I can make conscious, unconscious behaviors and thoughts and beliefs, the better off someone else is going to be, right? If I can surface unconscious stuff in you that is driving unhelpful behaviors and ways of being in the world, if I can make you conscious of that and then actually teach you how to be more vigilant about spotting it before you do it. You know what I'm saying? Like 3, 7s, and 8s are doers, right? They're just notorious doers. So the problem is they often do stuff before they think about it, right? So you have this powerful lunging energy going forward, wanting to make progress, as you said, wanting to make things happen, wanting to affect the environment, want to affect other people, want to affect outcomes. Well, a lot of times they're just doing that without any thought. Right? And of course, what happens then is you're just banging guardrail to guardrail through people's lives. People get hurt when we do that. Now, as you said, you get older and you learn, oh boy, I've run a few people over in my lifetime. Probably wasn't the greatest thing I ever did. And I've learned to sort of temper it back, right? But, you know, I can help people do that a little earlier in life than waiting to have to leave a lot of wreckage in their rearview mirror.
You mentioned burn calories. He lives in your town. Have you been exposed much to Donald Miller?
Yeah, Don and I are good friends.
Oh, are you? Okay. So that whole burn calories thing, you know, he's made a lot of money off of that seminar of marketing and telling your story about the whole burning calories, the brain, just to fill listeners in. Of all the organs in the body, the organ that burns the most amount of calories is the brain. And the brain is trying to save calories because we eat too many calories and we die because you're not sure, like our old ancient selves are not sure that you're going to be able to get 2,000 calories a day. You got to work really hard for it. So you just can't afford. That's why we're always looking for shortcuts, save calories. And Donald's whole thing was if your organization, you want to cast a vision for your organization, people don't want to think hard. And his old illustration when I went through the seminar was Hillary Clinton. He says, Hillary Clinton's campaign was what? And I was like, and he said, Donald Trump's was make America great again. Got it. Don't have to burn any more calories for it. So that's kind of his thing that's very helpful because people don't want to work to understand complicated things, which is also part of our detriment. I hadn't applied that before, though, Ian, to the self-awareness thing. I've always applied that to when you preach, don't make people burn calories. When you cast vision, don't make people burn calories. You're just too convoluted. I hadn't thought of it from the standpoint of we have an inborn wiring to not be reflective because reflecting requires burn calories. So much better to be in the trance of my historical behaviors, just the way I am and keep doing the way I am. And that's just all my conviction instead of the hard calorie burning work of self-reflection, meditation, and self-awareness. That's fresh.
Mm-hmm. Well, I mean, listen, by the way, I think Donald Trump took that Make America Great Again slogan from another campaign that actually was a Democratic campaign, as I recall.
Oh, really?
And I think, yeah.
And they have blue hats.
So he actually didn't burn a lot of calories coming up with it for himself. But that said, I think that, when you get into the habit of developing what I call an inner observer, right? So the inner observer is that part of your mind that can stand back from your present experience, observe what's happening, and make adjustments, right? And that are intelligent and thoughtful and, like with 8s. Let me give you an example of this, right? I was watching a TV show, a pretty good British TV show the other night called Blue Lights. And in it, this cop, who I think is probably an 8, right? He tells a young cop that he's mentoring. He says, when you knock on the door, before you rush in, always take a beat. And I thought, now that's great information for 8s, right? Like before you go rushing through a door, stop and take a beat. In other words, stop, reflect, think, take the pause, we might say in America, right? Like take a pause. And just little pieces of advice like that. That's your inner observer who can stand back from your moment to moment experience and go, all right, this person has just activated me, man. I am pissed, or I am activated right now. The ability to stand back from that experience and take a beat so that your next move is intelligent, thoughtful, wise, and in the best interest of all concerned. To me, that's like just good self-awareness. That's your inner observer doing its job, right? A lot of people have very flaccid inner observers. You know what I'm saying? They're just on autopilot. They're just banging through life, just not thinking very much. They're just reacting instead of responding to everything. They're like, I've just finished a new book, and I've talked in it. I use the illustration of people who are in reactivity are like people trapped in a phone booth with a murder hornet. You know what I mean? They're just swatting at stuff, and they're like just reacting to everything. We need people, I think, of every type who are responsive, who have the maturity and the adult mindset that says, I respond to life. I don't react to it, right? 3, 7s, and 8s can do a lot of reacting, right, in that triad. And 8s can be highly reactive if they're not attuned to what's going on inside.
So you seamlessly work the Enneagram and the numbers into a lot of things, because it's obviously very important to you. But I also know that your spiritual life is obviously very, very important to you. What's the link between your spiritual formation process and the Enneagram? How do you live that out? Are there any handholds you have that you operate?
Yeah, so there's a couple ways the Enneagram is kind of cool because it's a very adaptive system. So in other words, you can approach it from a purely spiritual perspective. You could approach it from a purely psychological science perspective, like interrelational perspective, or you can do it as a hybrid of both if you chose to. I spend most of my life talking about the Enneagram in corporate settings, so it's mostly the science of psychology and interpersonal relationships and personal growth. That said, in terms of the spiritual life, I know that, for example, with the Enneagram, one of the things that it points out is that each type has early pioneers of the Enneagram saw that each type tended to have an issue with one of the 7 deadly sins plus 2. They added 2. So for 4s, for example, it's envy. Envy, people, 4s struggle with envy more than they do. I struggle with all the different deadly sins, right? But envy, I'm really good at, right? I tend to compare myself a lot to people, always come out at the short end of the stick. And, because of that in my spiritual life, when I begin to feel envy awakening, and I can feel it even somatically in my body, I can tell when I'm starting to compare myself, and I begin to have that line of thinking, my inner observer can spot it, right? And be able to say, are you sure you want to play that game out? Because it doesn't end well for you or for anybody else if you allow envy to take the wheel here. And so maybe what you should do is try to practice equanimity, which is this ability to react with emotional balance to with whatever life throws at you at any given moment, So yes, it does play a role in my spiritual life. Maybe it would surprise people to know that maybe not as, I don't think about everything through the lens of the Enneagram. My kids all know their type. My wife knows that. We don't talk about the Enneagram all the time, hardly. It's a tool. It's not something that, I've organized my life around. My business is organized around it, but certainly not my life. It's one of many tools I got on my belt to help in spiritual development.
Yeah, that's good. Okay, coming down the final stretch here, and you've been very generous with your time. You said something that ties into what I wanted to also ask you about your book. Which is, I think, just a fascinating title. Jesus, My Father, the CIA, and Me. Great title. And I want to tie that to your line before that I wrote down, recapturing childhood trust. Boy, there's something almost transcendent about that phrase, recapture childhood trust, or something, I don't know what the right word is, transcendent, nostalgic, heartwarming. I don't know what it is. There's something captured there. Is the childhood trust in your book, are those two things together?
Well, let's just take a second here.
Yeah.
So if I was your coach, which I'm not, and you said that to me, that would send a flag up my pole really quick. And I would say, Brian, I wonder why that phrase, recapturing childhood trust, so arrested your attention. What is it? So now I would say to you, to help you train your inner observer, when those moments happen, you should stop and ask yourself, what's going on right now? So for you as an 8, the fact that I started talking about, I used the phrase, the fact that recapture childhood trust had an affect, it landed on you affectively in the realm of your feelings. Like you just kind of like stood up and paid attention, right? That would give you probably 2 days of good journaling to work on. Like, all right, so what's going on in me that is that a message for me? Is there something in that that's important that I need to not just register for a second and then let it go? Like maybe I need to catch that fish and take a look at it, you know? I think in terms of, my own story, I'm glad, that book, Jesus, My Father, the CIA, and Me, it's a memoir, and it's a kooky story about my growing up with an alcoholic dad, and who was also worked in the motion picture business, and then also was working for the Central Intelligence Agency in Europe and the Middle East. A fact that I didn't have confirmation of until I was in high school. And it's just the story of a kid that was trying to survive in very difficult circumstance and trying to make sense of the world on his own, and how I ended up making sense of the narrative that I was in, the story that I was in. I think we're all trying to do that. That's why people buy memoirs. People buy memoirs because they want to figure out how everybody else survived, and to learn from it what they can. I don't know. I think that's the big, I think everybody picks up a memoir, and by page 3, if they're not asking the question, how'd you do it? Then you probably you're not reading a great memoir, it's like, is he going to do it? Is he going to make it? How's he going to make sense of this crazy life, Because look, let's face it, it doesn't matter if, I don't care if you have a charmed childhood or a difficult childhood. Life hands all of us a difficult curriculum, right? It's a hard syllabus. And some people, it's a little easier than others. They got a gut, but for a lot of people, it's a hard syllabus, and everyone's interested in knowing what is it about this person that gave them the wherewithal to make sense of their lives, and how did they do it, and how did they move forward with it, And so that's what that book's about. And I'm glad you mentioned it. People ask me all the time, like, what's your favorite book? I'll be publishing my next new book in next January, my 6th book. And I think to myself, people say, well, what's your favorite book? I'm like, it's like kids, you love them all for different reasons, right? Like they all have their own little place in your heart. But that book actually holds a very special place in my heart, because I feel like some of my best communicating was done in that book, that season of my life. And I was at an age when making sense of my life, I had made enough sense of my life that I was able to really reflect on it and share the journey. I wasn't in the process still of trying to unpack trauma. I had already done a lot of work by that point. Right. And so, yeah, I like that book.
That's great.
I like that kid.
You like that kid. He actually turned out pretty good. He actually recaptured his childhood trust.
I think I did. Actually, I think one of the things that has always been maybe a problem for me is that I tend to be too trusting.
Oh, really?
Yeah, actually. I need to be slightly more suspicious, because I've gotten burned several times in my life by being too trusting of other people, and of their intentions and their motivations. But I would rather be that than somebody that's, overly suspicious and paranoid and defended against the possibility of relationship out of fear that someone's got a hidden agenda all the time.
So I was drawn by that topic of recapture childhood trust, even before I go into what about myself caused me to lose that trust. That phrase struck out to me that it seems like the world basically does that to all of us. It beats the snot out of us because we get that stolen from us. We get that trust, that childlike faith, that childlike wonder, that childlike lack of cynicism. It just seems to have been squashed and beat out of all of us. And I think we all have to probably go on our own journey of recapturing the childhood trust. That was my initial thoughts.
Well, I think that's probably more true for 8s than other types.
Oh, interesting. Why?
And I just think that's a fact of the life of the 8. I think 6s to a degree have a similar, particularly what we call counterphobic 6s, have concern about the hidden agendas of other people. They're a little bit more skeptical, but 8s, oftentimes see a might makes right world where the powerful are in control and the weak have to submit. And they made a decision unconsciously, as we all do. We all make unconscious promises to ourselves as children. And I think one of the promises some 8s might identify with is, I will not allow myself to be at the mercy of other people. I'm going to stay in control. And maybe one of the ways I'm going to do that is just by crafting a very big, sometimes intimidating kind of personality that kind of communicates to people, don't screw with me. And so they lose childhood trust, right, in others, and they take a defended posture. And so it seems to me that one part of the journey for the 8 is I'm not asking them to become naive, right, about people's intentions, but I think that great leadership, great personhood, great relationships, certainly, are predicated, they're built on, they assume, they bake into their calculations a certain level of vulnerability. And I think sometimes too, 8s and 3s in particular in some ways, have to make sure that their vulnerability is vulnerability and not calculated transparency. And there's a difference between the two. Sometimes people can stand up in front of big groups of people and they'll be transparent about, I have problems with porn, or I got problems with this, and I'm open book, I'll share all my problems with you. And it's a little bit like, sometimes I'm like, okay, part of me now, after all these years of doing this, and just based on my own personal experience and my own flaws, knows that sometimes people are, what looks like vulnerability is just calculated transparency. And it's not the same thing. Like vulnerability, man, when it's real, the room goes quiet fast. You can feel it. The person who's sharing is doing so at great personal cost. When I'm with somebody that, and I've seen this, I've been part of 12-step groups for many years for people in addiction from chemical addiction, right? And, we have these speaker meetings. And in this new book I just wrote, I tell the story. I was at a speaker meeting once in Connecticut, and this woman got up in front of this very highfalutin group of Wall Streeters. And it was a woman who really had been living in cheap hotels and lost custody of her children and had sold her body to get drugs. You know what I mean? She had about 60 days sober when she was telling her story to the group. And the group was taken to absolute silence, bro. I mean, it was such a bad story, the stuff that she had done and didn't, oh my gosh. Normally people clap at the end of a share like that, right? They get 20 or 30 minutes and then everyone talks about how they related, right? People were just brought to silence. All you could hear was the fluorescent lamp buzzing in the background, when she was done. And finally, this old woman in the back of the room, I'll never forget who she was. She was a much beloved member of that tribe and actually knew Bill Wilson, the founder of AA. She was in her 80s then, and this was back in the 80s or 90s. Yeah. And she, in this pause, and it was terribly awkward because this woman's standing there waiting for applause, and all of us are like jaw-dropping looking at her, right? She's incredibly vulnerable. And this woman goes, "The word of the Lord," when she was finished. And everybody in the room, everyone in the room, out of force of habit, just said, "Thanks be to God." And what she was saying was, this woman's vulnerability, this woman's open-heartedness, her willingness to put herself out there, made her story, in a way, a kind of gospel of good news, to which all we could say was, "Thanks be to God that you're here." You know, I can hardly still tell that story without getting choked up, because I've seen real vulnerability and I see the good it can do. I've seen false transparency, and I just kind of go, okay, whatever. It seems more like image management or landscaping an image, versus actual vulnerability. I don't know how we got up on this track, but that's, I just think vulnerability
recapturing
is
childhood
really,
trust. Yes.
Yeah, it's the ability to trust, and not child. And as you said, it's childlike, not childish trust. It's childlike trust. And we have to try to do these things, and we make mistakes as we try to do it, and we do our best until we get it right. And but when I see true vulnerability in art, in music, I know it. I can feel it. I know it when it's real.
Ian, it's been fantastic, and it's not very often where I come away from a podcast with homework, but you gave me some homework, and I'm going to do it. It's good stuff. 2 days I'm going to spend my time with God doing some journaling, which is basically for me, when I'm journaling, it's a combination of thoughts and prayers that are put on paper, and you see where it goes. So 2 days of that around recapturing childhood trust. It's a good challenge.
Mm-hmm. Great. I'm glad.
Yeah. Thank you. Thank you. And folks, that's why we call it the aggressive life here. I think you've gotten some new thoughts from Ian, really good new thoughts. And I'd say if there's anything that you thought, ooh, that was good to hear, why don't we all do that? It's called the aggressive life, not the interesting idea life. So let's do some aggressive, like slow down and journal. Maybe there's something here that you want to just spend time processing, putting down, slowing down. That'd be a great idea. Ian, last thing, when you take off here, just tell us how to find you, how to squeeze all the life out of the social media realm where you are, your books, whatever. Basically, please help us support you. What do we do?
Yeah, so website and all my socials are ianmorgancron.com or at ianmorgancron, IANMORGANCRON. Fantastic.
Well, Ian, we're on a roll now. We had, a conversation 25 years ago, and now we've got 2 conversations inside of a few months. Man, we're becoming best buddies here.
Indeed, I'm glad.
I don't know that someone like you can become a best buddy with an 8. That probably just annoy you. Like your romantic self.
Oh no, that's not true. Okay, all right, yeah. Okay, well, don't flatter yourself, buddy. You're not that bad. I'm the father of an 8, and so I have a child who I absolutely adore, who is an 8. And many of my closest friends are 8s. Any number on the Enneagram, I can be friends with any number on the Enneagram to the degree that they're self-aware and they're doing their work. If you're sound asleep in the trance of your type, then chances are it's going to be a short-lived relationship or a hard one. And but for people who are doing their work and are trying to figure out how to be really wonderful presences in the world, I'm all in.
Sound asleep in the trance of your type. Okay, boys and girls, go ahead and journal that. We'll see you next time on The Aggressive Life. Thanks for joining us on this journey toward aggressive living. Find more resources, articles, past episodes, and live events over at briantome.com. My new books, repackaged edition of The 5 Marks of a Man, and a brand new 5 Marks of a Man tactical guide are open right now on Amazon. If you haven't yet, leave this podcast a rating and review. It really helps get the show in front of new listeners. And if you want to connect, find me on Instagram at Brian Tome. The Aggressive Life is a production of Crossroads Church, Cincinnati, Ohio.